They called her the Ghost, not because she was scary, but because she seemed to disappear whenever anyone tried to talk to her. For 3 years, Sarah Chun sat in the back corner of every class, ate lunch alone, and watched from the sidelines as her classmates celebrated their victories. Nobody knew that behind her thick glasses and quiet demeanor, she was nursing a secret dream that seemed impossible: to become the first person from Lincoln High School to hit a target at 4,200 meters. What happened next would change not just her life, but everyone's understanding of what quiet determination could achieve. Sarah Chun pressed her face against the cold window of the school bus, watching the morning mist roll across the empty fields outside Lincoln High School. The other students chatted loudly behind her, their voices mixing into a familiar buzz that she had learned to tune out over the past 3 years. At 17, Sarah had perfected the art of being invisible. She wore the same gray hoodie every day, kept her long black hair covering half her face, and spoke only when teachers directly asked her questions. The bus lurched to a stop, and Sarah waited until everyone else had gotten off before making her way to the front. Mrs. Patterson, the bus driver, gave her the same gentle smile she had been offering for 3 years. "Have a good day, sweetheart," Mrs. Patterson said softly. Sarah nodded and stepped down onto the cracked pavement. Lincoln High School stood before her like a brick fortress, its windows reflecting the gray October sky. She pulled her backpack tighter and walked toward the main entrance, keeping her eyes down to avoid making contact with anyone. Inside, the hallways buzzed with the energy of a typical Monday morning. Students clustered around lockers, sharing weekend stories and complaining about upcoming tests. Sarah moved through them like water, unnoticed and unbothered. She had grown comfortable in her invisibility, finding safety in the shadows that others seemed to fear. Her first class was advanced mathematics with Mr. Rodriguez, one of the few teachers who had tried to draw her out of her shell during her freshman year. He had eventually given up, settling instead for appreciating her consistently perfect test scores and homework assignments. Sarah took her usual seat in the back corner, pulled out her notebook, and began copying the equations from a board. "Sarah," Mr. Rodriguez called out halfway through the lesson, "would you mind solving problem number 7 for us?" Every head in the classroom turned toward her, and Sarah felt the familiar flutter of anxiety in her chest. She cleared her throat and spoke just loud enough to be heard. "The answer is 43.7 degrees, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Mr. Rodriguez smiled and nodded. "Excellent work, as always." The attention shifted away from her as quickly as it had come, and Sarah returned to her notes. She had learned that giving correct answers quickly was the best way to avoid prolonged attention. Teachers appreciated her knowledge, but they stopped trying to engage her in discussion when she made it clear she preferred to work alone. After math class, Sarah walked to her locker and gathered her books for English literature. As she closed the metal door, she noticed a group of students clustered around a bulletin board near the main office. Curiosity got the better of her, and she moved closer to see what had captured their attention. A bright yellow flyer announced the formation of a new club, Lincoln High Precision Sports Team, archery, target shooting, and long-distance competition. Below the heading, smaller text explained that the school had received a grant to start a precision sports program, complete with professional equipment and coaching. The club was open to all students, regardless of experience level. Sarah stared at the flyer for a long moment, reading every word twice. Her heart began to beat faster as she thought about the small bow and arrow set her grandfather had given her for her 8th birthday. She had spent countless hours in her backyard, shooting at targets he had set up for her. Even after he passed away when she was 12, she had continued practicing, using the old equipment until it finally fell apart 2 years ago. "Are you thinking about joining?" The voice startled her, and Sarah turned to find Jessica Martinez, one of the most popular girls in her grade, standing beside her. Jessica's long blonde hair was perfectly styled, and she wore the kind of confident smile that came naturally to people who had never felt invisible. Sarah opened her mouth to respond, but No words came out. She shook her head and started to walk away, but Jessica stepped beside her. "I think it sounds really cool," Jessica continued, seemingly unbothered by Sarah's silence. "I've never tried archery, but I've always wanted to learn. Maybe we could sign up together." The suggestion was so unexpected that Sarah stopped walking. She looked at Jessica with confusion, wondering if this was some kind of joke. Popular students like Jessica didn't invite quiet girls like Sarah to join activities together. There had to be some mistake. I have to get a class," Sarah managed to say, her voice barely audible. Jessica's smile faltered slightly, but she recovered quickly. "Of course. Maybe I'll see you there if you decide to check it out. The first meeting is after school on Wednesday." Sarah nodded and hurried away, her mind spinning with possibilities and doubts. She had dreamed about getting back into archery, but she had never imagined doing it at school, in front of other people. The thought both excited and terrified her. During lunch, Sarah sat at her usual table in the corner of the cafeteria, picking at a sandwich while watching other students laugh and talk with their friends. She thought about her grandfather and the patient way he had taught her to hold the bow, to breathe steadily, and to focus on nothing but the target in front of her. "The key is not to think too much," he had told her during one of their afternoon practice sessions. "Trust your instincts, trust your training, and let everything else disappear." She had been good at it, better than he had expected from someone so young. By the time she was 11, she could hit a target consistently from distances that impressed even her grandfather, who had been an amateur archer in his youth. She remembered the pride in his eyes when she managed to hit a bullseye from 50 yards away. After his death, archery had become her way of staying connected to him. She practiced alone in the backyard, setting up increasingly challenging targets and pushing herself to improve. When her equipment finally broke, she had saved every dollar from her part-time job at the local library, planning to buy new gear when she had enough money. The school bell interrupted her thoughts, and Sarah gathered her things for afternoon classes. As she walked through the hallways, she found herself thinking about the Precision Sports Club. The idea of having access to professional equipment and coaching was appealing, but the thought of practicing in front of other students made her stomach turn. Her last class of the day was physics with Mrs. Chun, who shared Sarah's last name, but no family relation. Mrs. Chun was known for her enthusiasm and her ability to make complex concepts understandable. Today's lesson focused on projectile motion and the variables that affected trajectory. When we think about precision at long distances, Mrs. Chun explained, drawing diagrams on the whiteboard, we have to consider factors like gravity, air resistance, wind speed, and the rotation of the Earth itself. The mathematics become incredibly complex, but the basic principles remain the same. Sarah found herself completely absorbed in the lesson. She took detailed notes and began working through calculations in the margins of her notebook. The physics of long-distance shooting fascinated her, and she realized that her strong mathematics background could be a significant advantage in precision sports. After class, Mrs. Chun approached her desk as other students filed out. "Excellent questions today, Sarah," she said warmly. "I noticed you seemed particularly interested in the projectile motion calculations. Are you thinking about applying these concepts to something specific?" Sarah hesitated, then mentioned the Precision Sports Club. Mrs. Chin's face lit up with excitement. "That's wonderful. I actually volunteered to be one of the faculty advisors for that program. Your mathematical skills would be incredibly valuable for long-distance shooting competitions. I hope you'll consider joining us." Walking to her locker after school, Sarah felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness that she hadn't experienced in years. The encouragement from Mrs. Chun had given her confidence, but she still wasn't sure she was ready to step out of her comfortable shadows. She gathered her books and walked toward the main exit, passing the bulletin board where the yellow flyers still hung. A few students stood nearby, discussing the club and speculating about what kinds of equipment the school had purchased. Sarah slowed her pace, listening to their conversation. "I heard they got some really expensive rifles and bows," one student said. like competition-level stuff. And they're going to take us to real shooting ranges for practice," another added. "My dad said the program is designed to prepare students for state-level competitions." State-level competitions. The phrase echoed in Sarah's mind as she walked home from school. She had never imagined competing against other students, but the idea sparked something inside her that had been dormant since her grandfather's death. That evening, Sarah sat in her small bedroom, staring at a faded photograph of her grandfather teaching her to draw a bow. In the picture, she was 9 years old, her tongue sticking out in concentration as she aimed at a target in their backyard. Her grandfather stood behind her, his hands gently guiding her form, his face beaming with pride. She opened her laptop and began researching precision shooting competitions. What she found amazed her. Students from high schools across the country competed in events that required incredible skill and concentration. The longest recorded successful shot by a high school student was 3,800 meters, achieved by a senior from Texas who had gone on to compete in national championships. 4,200 meters. The number appeared in several articles as a benchmark that few amateur shooters ever reached. It required not just skill and practice, but a deep understanding of physics, weather conditions, and equipment capabilities. Most competitive shooters took years to work up to such distances, and many never achieved that level of precision. Sarah closed her laptop and lay back on her bed, staring at the ceiling. For the first time in years, she had found something that excited her more than it scared her. The thought of attempting a 4,200-meter shot seemed impossible, but it also felt like exactly the kind of challenge her grandfather would have encouraged her to pursue. The next morning, Sarah arrived at school earlier than usual. She walked directly to the bulletin board and read the Precision Sports Club flyer one more time. Then, before she could change her mind, she wrote her name on the sign-up sheet at the bottom. Sarah Chun. Her handwriting looked small and uncertain next to the bold signatures of other students, but it was there. She had taken the first step towards something that could change everything. During her morning classes, Sarah found it difficult to concentrate. Her mind kept drifting to Wednesday afternoon and what the first club meeting might be like. She wondered about the other students who had signed up and whether they had more experience than she did. Most of all, she wondered whether she would have the courage to actually show up. Lunchtime brought an unexpected encounter. As Sarah sat at her usual table, Jessica Martinez approached with her lunch tray. "Mind if I sit here?" Jessica asked, gesturing to the empty chair across from Sarah. Sarah shook her head, too surprised to speak. Jessica sat down and began eating her salad, seemingly comfortable with the silence that stretched between them. "I saw that you signed up for the Precision Sports Club," Jessica said eventually. "I signed up too, right after our conversation yesterday." Sarah looked up from her sandwich, meeting Jessica's eyes for the first time in their brief acquaintance. There was no mockery or judgment in Jessica's expression, only genuine interest. "I've never tried anything like it before," Jessica continued, "but I thought it might be fun to learn something completely new. What about you? Do you have experience with archery or shooting?" For a moment, Sarah considered giving her usual non-answer and retreating into silence. But something about Jessica's straightforward manner made her feel safe enough to respond honestly. "My grandfather taught me archery when I was little," Sarah said quietly. "I used to practice a lot, but I haven't done it in a couple of years." Jessica's face brightened. "That's amazing. I bet you're really good at it. I'll probably be terrible at first, but I figure everyone has to start somewhere, right?" Sarah nodded, feeling some of her anxiety begin to ease. Maybe the club wouldn't be as intimidating as she had imagined. Maybe there would be other beginners who were just as nervous as she was. The rest of the day passed more quickly than usual, and before Sarah knew it, she was standing outside the school gymnasium on Wednesday afternoon, holding the yellow flyer in her sweaty palm. Through the windows, she could see students gathering inside, along with several adults who must have been the coaches and faculty advisors. Sarah took a deep breath, thinking about her grandfather and the patient way he had taught her to overcome her fears. Then, she pushed open the door and stepped inside, ready to begin a journey that would test everything she thought she knew about herself. The Lincoln High School gymnasium had been transformed, where volleyball nets and basketball hoops usually dominated the space. Professional archery targets now stood in neat rows along one wall. Tables displayed an impressive array of equipment: compound bows, recurve bows, arrows with different tip configurations, and electronic devices that Sarah didn't recognize but assumed were related to measuring accuracy and distance. About 30 students milled around the space, their conversations creating a nervous energy that Sarah could feel from across the room. She recognized some faces from her classes, but many were unfamiliar upperclassmen who seemed more confident and outgoing than she felt. Mrs. Chun stood near the equipment tables, talking animatedly with a tall man in military fatigues who must have been the professional coach mentioned in the flyer. Sarah noticed that her physics teacher spotted her immediately and waved her over with an encouraging smile. "Sarah, I'm so glad you decided to join us," Mrs. Chan said as Sarah approached hesitantly. "I'd like you to meet Coach Anderson. He's a retired Marine sniper who will be leading our precision shooting program." Coach Anderson extended a firm handshake and studied Sarah with the kind of intense focus she had only seen in movies about military personnel. His eyes were sharp and calculating, but his smile was warm and genuine. "Mrs. Chun tells me you have some background in archery," Coach Anderson said. "That's a great foundation for what we're going to be doing here." The principles of precision shooting are very similar across different disciplines. Sarah nodded, not trusting herself to speak coherently. She had expected a typical gym teacher or volunteer parent, not someone with actual military sniper experience. The realization that this program was more serious than she had imagined both excited and intimidated her. "All right, everyone, let's gather around for our first official meeting," Coach Anderson called out, his voice carrying easily across the gymnasium. The students formed a loose circle, some sitting cross-legged on the floor, while others remained standing. Coach Anderson's presence commanded immediate attention. He moved with the kind of precise economy that suggested years of training and discipline. When he spoke, his voice was calm but authoritative. "Welcome to the Lincoln High Precision Sports Team," he began. "Over the next few months, we're going to explore the art and science of long-distance precision shooting. Some of you have experience with archery or firearms, but many of you are complete beginners. That's perfectly fine. What matters most is your willingness to learn, practice consistently, and push yourself beyond what you think is possible." He gestured toward the equipment tables. "The school district has invested significantly in this program. We have competition-grade bows, arrows, and eventually we'll be working with precision rifles under controlled conditions at certified ranges. Our goal is to prepare interested students for state and potentially national competitions." A student raised her hand. Sarah recognized her as Amanda Foster, a senior who played on the varsity soccer team. "How far do competitors usually shoot in these competitions?" Coach Anderson smiled. "That's an excellent question. In high school archery competitions, distances typically range from 20 to 90 meters. However, precision rifle competitions can extend much further. The current high school record for a successful precision shot is 3,800 meters, set last year by a student in Texas." Sarah felt her heart rate increase. 3,800 meters was impressive, but she found herself thinking about the 4,200-meter mark she had read about online. Nobody had mentioned whether any high school student had ever achieved that distance. "Before we get ahead of ourselves," Coach Anderson continued, "we need to master the fundamentals. Precision shooting is equal parts physical skill, mental discipline, and scientific knowledge. You'll need to understand ballistics, weather conditions, equipment mechanics, and, most importantly, how to control your own body and mind under pressure." He moved to one of the equipment tables and picked up a sleek compound bow. "We'll start with archery because it teaches the core principles without the complexity of firearms. Breathing, stance, grip, sight alignment, and follow-through are identical whether you're shooting an arrow or a bullet." For the next hour, Coach Anderson demonstrated basic archery techniques, while Mrs. Chun provided scientific explanations for why certain methods were more effective than others. Sarah found herself completely absorbed, taking mental notes and comparing the instruction to what her grandfather had taught her years earlier. When it came time for hands-on practice, students were divided into small groups and rotated between different stations. Sarah found herself grouped with Jessica, Amanda Foster, and two boys she didn't recognize. One was tall and athletic-looking, while the other was shorter with thick glasses that reminded Sarah of her own. "I'm Marcus," the tall boy said as they approached the first station. "I've been bow hunting with my dad since I was 12, but I've never tried competitive archery." The boy with glasses introduced himself as David. "I'm more interested in the physics side of things," he admitted. "My dad's an engineer, and he's always talking about trajectory calculations and stuff like that." Jessica looked around the group with her characteristic enthusiasm. "I'm a complete beginner, so I'll probably need a lot of help." "Sarah, didn't you say your grandfather taught you archery?" All eyes turned to Sarah, and she felt the familiar flutter of anxiety. But something about the genuine interest in their faces made her feel less defensive than usual. "A little," she said quietly. "It's been a while since I practiced." Coach Anderson approached their group, carrying several bows of different sizes and weights. "Let's start by finding equipment that fits each of you properly," he said. "Archery is highly individual. What works perfectly for one person might be completely wrong for another." He handed Sarah a medium-weight recurve bow and watched carefully as she tested the draw. The moment her fingers wrapped around the string and she began to pull, muscle memory kicked in. Her stance automatically adjusted, her shoulders squared, and her breathing became controlled and rhythmic. "Excellent form," Coach Anderson said, nodding approvingly. "You definitely have experience. Try drawing to full extension and hold for a count of 5. Sarah drew the bow smoothly, feeling the familiar tension in her back muscles and the satisfying resistance of the string. She held the position effortlessly, her aim steady and controlled. When she released the tension, Coach Anderson smiled. "Outstanding. You've retained proper technique despite time away from the sport. That tells me your grandfather was an excellent teacher." The praise made Sarah's chest swell with pride and sadness simultaneously. Her grandfather would have been so proud to see her using the skills he had taught her in a real program with professional instruction. Over the next several stations, the group practiced basic shooting techniques, starting at very close range with large targets. Sarah's arrows consistently hit near the center, while the others struggled with basic accuracy. She noticed David taking detailed notes about arrow flight patterns and asking technical questions about biomechanics. During a break, Jessica approached Sarah with curiosity written all over her face. "You're really good at this," she said. "Like, really good. How far could you shoot when you practiced with your grandfather?" Sarah hesitated, then decided to be honest. "We worked up to about 60 yards consistently. But that was years ago, and I was using older equipment." 60 yards. Marcus looked impressed. "That's farther than most hunters need to shoot. You could probably compete right now if you wanted to." The idea of competing still seemed foreign to Sarah, but she was beginning to feel more comfortable with the group. David's scientific approach reminded her of her own analytical nature. Marcus's experience provided helpful context, and Jessica's genuine enthusiasm made everything feel less intimidating. As the practice session continued, Coach Anderson moved between groups, offering individual instruction and observing each student's progress. When he reached Sarah's group, he spent several minutes watching her shoot before making any comments. "Sarah, I'd like to try something," he said, moving the target back by 10 meters. "Same technique, but I want you to adjust for the increased distance." Sarah studied the new target placement, automatically calculating the adjustments needed for trajectory and wind resistance. She drew the bow, made minute modifications to her aim, and released. The arrow struck just outside the bullseye. "Impressive," Coach Anderson said. Most students take weeks to make that kind of instinctive adjustment. You clearly have natural talent, but more importantly, you understand the underlying principles. After the session ended, students began cleaning up equipment and discussing their impressions of the program. Sarah found herself staying later than necessary, reluctant to leave the environment that had felt so comfortable and familiar. Mrs. Chin approached as Sarah carefully placed arrows back in their designated containers. "How did it feel getting back in archery after so long?" "Good," Sarah said, then paused and added more honestly, "really good. I had forgotten how much I enjoyed it." "I could tell. Coach Anderson was very impressed with your natural ability and technique retention. He mentioned that you might be ready for advanced training sooner than most students." Sarah felt a mix of excitement and anxiety at the suggestion. Advanced training sounded appealing, but it also meant more attention and potentially higher expectations. "What does advanced training involve?" she asked. Mrs. Chun smiled mysteriously. "You'll have to ask Coach Anderson about that. But I will say this, he mentioned something about longer distances and specialized equipment for students who show exceptional promise." Walking home that evening, Sarah felt energized in a way she hadn't experienced in years. Her muscles were slightly sore from drawing the bow repeatedly, but it was a satisfying soreness that reminded her of productive time spent with her grandfather. At home, she sat at her desk and opened a notebook to record her thoughts about the practice session. Writing had always helped her process new experiences and set goals for improvement. First practice notes, she wrote at the top of the page. Then, she began listing observations. Her form had remained solid despite the long break. Her instinctive range adjustments were accurate, and she felt comfortable with the group dynamic despite her usual social anxiety. As she wrote, Sarah found herself thinking about the 4,200-meter challenge that had captured her imagination. Coach Anderson had mentioned that precision rifle shooting could extend much further than archery, and that exceptional students might have opportunities for specialized training. She opened her laptop and began researching long-distance shooting competitions more thoroughly. The mathematics involved in calculating trajectories at extreme distances were complex, involving variables like Coriolis effect, barometric pressure, humidity, and minute variations in bullet or arrow weight. But as she studied the calculations, Sarah realized that her strong background in physics and mathematics could be significant advantages. Many successful precision shooters relied heavily on scientific knowledge and computer-assisted calculations to achieve extreme accuracy. Over the next several days, Sarah found herself looking forward to school in a way she hadn't since elementary school. The Precision Sports Club had given her something to focus on beyond just getting through each day unnoticed. She began paying closer attention in physics class, seeing connections between classroom lessons and practical shooting applications. During lunch on Friday, Jessica invited herself to sit with Sarah again. This time, she brought Amanda Foster and David from their practice group. "We were talking about forming a study group," Jessica explained. "David knows a lot about the technical side. You understand the practical application, and Amanda, and I can work on the physical conditioning aspect." Coach Anderson said that successful precision shooting requires all of those elements. The idea of voluntarily spending more time with other students would have terrified Sarah just a week earlier. But something about this group felt different. They were united by a common interest rather than social status or popularity, and they seemed genuinely interested in helping each other improve. "That sounds helpful," Sarah said, surprising herself with her quick agreement. David pushed his glasses up and pulled out a notebook filled with diagrams and equations. "I've been researching ballistics calculations, and there are some really interesting formulas for long-distance accuracy. Sarah, with your physics background and practical experience, you might be able to help me understand how the theoretical stuff applies in real shooting situations." Amanda leaned forward with interest. "And I've been looking into the physical training that competitive shooters do. Apparently, breathing control and muscle stability are huge factors in precision shooting. There are specific exercises that can improve performance." As they talked, Sarah felt a growing excitement about the possibilities ahead. For the first time in her high school career, she was part of a group that shared her interests and respected her contributions. More importantly, she was beginning to believe that her quiet determination and analytical approach might actually be advantages in the world of precision shooting. The second practice session was scheduled for the following Wednesday, and Sarah found herself counting the days with an anticipation that felt completely foreign to her usual experience of school. She was ready to take the next step toward discovering just how far her renewed passion for precision could take her. 3 weeks into the precision sports program, Sarah's world had changed in ways she never could have imagined. The study group she had joined with Jessica, Amanda, and David met twice a week in the library, poring over ballistics charts and practicing breathing exercises. For the first time since her grandfather's death, Sarah felt like she belonged somewhere. Coach Anderson had noticed her rapid progress and begun giving her individualized instruction after regular practice sessions. Her accuracy at standard archery distances had become consistently exceptional, and he had started introducing more challenging scenarios, shooting in different weather conditions, adjusting for wind patterns, and working with equipment modifications. Sarah, Coach Anderson called out during their fourth practice session, "I want you to try something different today." He led her to a corner of the gymnasium where a specialized compound bow sat on a stand. It was noticeably different from the equipment they had been using, sleeker, with more complex mechanical components and what appear to be advanced sighting systems. "This is competition-grade equipment," he explained, "the kind used by students who compete at state and national levels. I think you're ready to see what you can do with professional-grade gear." Sarah approached the bow with the reverence she might have shown a priceless artifact. The weight distribution was perfect, the grip molded to fit naturally in her hand, and the draw was smoother than anything she had experienced. "The sighting system is computerized," Coach Anderson continued, pointing to a small digital display mounted above the grip. "It calculates distance, wind speed, and trajectory automatically. But remember, technology is only as good as the person using it. Your fundamentals are what make the difference." Sarah lifted the bow and immediately felt the difference. Everything about it seemed designed to enhance precision and consistency. When she drew the string, the mechanical components moved with whisper-quiet efficiency. "I want you to try shooting at the 70-meter target," Coach Anderson said, indicating a target that had been set up in the school's outdoor practice area visible through the gymnasium's back doors. 70 meters was significantly farther than Sarah had ever attempted, even during her childhood practice sessions with her grandfather. She felt a familiar flutter of nerves, but also an excitement that overrode her anxiety. Walking outside, Sarah noticed that other students had gathered to watch. Word had apparently spread that Coach Anderson was testing her on advanced equipment at extended distances. Jessica gave her an encouraging thumbs up, while David looked on with the intense curiosity of someone studying a fascinating scientific experiment. The outdoor target looked impossibly small from 70 meters away. Sarah took her position, feeling the weight of everyone's attention. She closed her eyes briefly, remembering her grandfather's voice. "Trust your instincts, trust your training, and let everything else disappear." She opened her eyes, raised the bow, and began her drawing sequence. The computerized sight automatically calculated the distance and suggested an aim point, but Sarah found herself making intuitive adjustments based on the slight breeze she could feel on her face and the angle of the late afternoon sunlight. Everything else did disappear. The watching students, the pressure of performing with advanced equipment. Even her own self-doubt faded into background noise. There was only the target, the bow, and the arrow waiting to be released. She fired. The arrow arced gracefully through the air, its flight path visible against the clear October sky. It struck the target with a solid thunk that carried clearly back to the group of observers. Even from a distance, Sarah could see that it had hit very close to the center. A cheer went up from the watching students, led by Jessica's enthusiastic whooping. Coach Anderson nodded approvingly and produced a pair of binoculars to confirm the shot placement. "Bullseye," he announced. "Dead center at 70 meters on your first attempt with competition equipment." Sarah felt a surge of pride and accomplishment unlike anything she had experienced in years. But more than that, she felt a profound connection to her grandfather and the skills he had patiently taught her. She realized that this moment was exactly what he had been preparing her for, even though neither of them had known it at the time. Over the following weeks, Coach Anderson began incorporating Sarah into advanced training sessions that took place after regular practice. These smaller groups focused on precision shooting techniques used in competitive settings. Sarah found herself working alongside upperclassmen who had been in the program since its inception. One of these students was Michael Torres, a senior who held the school record for accuracy at 90 meters. Michael had initially been skeptical of the quiet junior who had suddenly appeared in advanced sessions, but Sarah's consistent performance had earned his respect. "You've got something special," Michael told her after a particularly challenging practice session. "I've been doing this for 2 years, and you're already shooting better than I was after my first year. Coach Anderson thinks you could be ready for competitive events by spring." Competitive events. The phrase still felt surreal to Sarah, but she was beginning to believe it might actually be possible. Her accuracy had become remarkably consistent, and her understanding of the scientific principles behind precision shooting continued to improve through her collaboration with David and her advanced physics coursework. The breakthrough came during a November practice session when Coach Anderson announced that the team would be visiting a professional shooting range for their first experience with precision rifles. Sarah felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness as she boarded the bus with 15 other advanced students for the trip to Riverside Range, located 30 miles outside of town. Riverside Range was unlike anything Sarah had expected. The facility was enormous, with multiple shooting bays designed for different distances and types of firearms. The longest range extended to nearly 1,000 meters, with targets visible only through powerful spotting scopes. Their instructor for the day was Elena Vasquez, a former Olympic shooter who now trained competitive marksmen. Elena moved with the same precise efficiency as Coach Anderson, but she had an additional quality of absolute calm that seemed to radiate from her like a physical presence. Precision rifle shooting is archery's more technically demanding cousin, Elena explained as the group gathered around a table displaying an array of rifles and optical equipment. The principles are identical: breathing, stance, sight alignment, and follow-through. But the precision required is measured in fractions of inches at distances that would have been unimaginable to shooters just a generation ago. She picked up a sleek rifle with an enormously complex scope mounted on top. This is a .308 caliber precision rifle capable of sub-minute of angle accuracy at distances exceeding 1,000 meters. In the right hands, with perfect conditions and proper calculation, it can consistently hit targets smaller than a dinner plate at those distances. Sarah studied the rifle with fascination. The scope alone was larger than some of the bows she had been using, and the entire system looked like it belonged in a science laboratory rather than a traditional shooting range. Today, we'll start at 200 meters and work our way up based on individual performance, Elena continued. Some of you may reach 400 or 500 meters by the end of the session. A few exceptional students might attempt 600 meters if conditions are favorable. The group was divided into pairs, with each pair assigned to a shooting bay with an instructor. Sarah found herself paired with Michael Torres, working with a young instructor named James who had competed in national precision shooting championships as a college student. James spent the first hour teaching them the fundamentals of rifle shooting, how to properly grip the weapon, how to use the bipod for stability, and how to work with the sophisticated optical systems. Sarah absorbed every detail, asking technical questions about scope adjustments and bullet trajectory calculations. When it came time for live firing, Sarah approached the rifle with the same careful attention she brought to archery. The weight was different, the stance required modifications, but the core principles her grandfather had taught her remained constant. Her first shot at 200 meters hit just outside the center ring. James made minor adjustments to her position and scope settings, then encouraged her to try again. The second shot was closer to center, and the third was a clean bullseye. Excellent natural ability, James observed. Your fundamentals are solid, and you're making good instinctive adjustments. Let's try 300 meters. At 300 meters, the target appeared dramatically smaller through the scope. Sarah had to make more significant calculations for bullet drop and wind drift, but her physics background helped her understand the variables involved. Her first shot at the extended distance hit the outer ring of the target. Outstanding, James said. Most students need several sessions before they can hit anything at 300 meters. Would you like to try 400? Sarah looked down the range at the 400-meter target, which was barely visible as a speck even through the powerful scope. The distance seemed impossibly far, but something inside her responded to the challenge. Yes, she said simply. James made careful adjustments to the scope and talked her through the more complex calculations required for the extended distance. Sarah studied the wind flags positioned along the range, noting the slight variations in direction and speed that would affect her bullet's flight path. She settled into position behind a rifle, controlled her breathing, and began the careful process of sight alignment. Through the scope, the target appeared as a tiny circle surrounded by vast, empty space. The mathematical part of her mind calculated trajectory and wind compensation, while the intuitive part of her consciousness reached for the state of perfect focus her grandfather had taught her to achieve. She fired. The bullet's flight time at 400 meters was long enough to track through the scope. Sarah watched as it arced toward the target, adjusting slightly in flight as air currents affected its path. It struck the target with a distant crack that echoed back across the range. James raised his spotting scope and studied the target for a long moment. When he lowered it, his expression was one of amazement. Dead center, he announced. Perfect bullseye at 400 meters on your first attempt. The other students and instructors at nearby shooting bays had noticed the commotion and gathered around to see what had happened. Elena Vasquez herself walked over to examine Sarah's target through her own spotting scope. Remarkable, Elena said after studying the shot placement. I've trained students for 15 years, and I've never seen anyone achieve that level of precision at 400 meters on their first day with a rifle. Sarah felt the familiar mix of pride and disbelief that had been accompanying her achievements throughout the program. Part of her still couldn't believe that the quiet girl who had hidden in corners just months earlier was now standing in a professional shooting range, being praised by an Olympic-level instructor. But a larger part of her was beginning to understand that her grandfather had given her something truly special. The patience, discipline, and intuitive understanding of precision that he had cultivated in their backyard practice sessions had been preparation for this moment, even though neither of them had realized it at the time. Elena approached Sarah directly as the group prepared to leave the range. I want to talk to you about something, she said in a low voice that wouldn't carry to the other students. Coach Anderson has told me about your progress, and what I've seen today confirms his assessment. You have exceptional natural talent combined with proper fundamental training. She paused, studying Sarah with the same intensity Sarah had noticed in Coach Anderson's initial evaluation. There are opportunities for advanced students who show this level of promise, Elena continued. Specialized training programs, national competitions, even scholarship opportunities for college. But it would require a significant commitment and a willingness to push yourself far beyond what most students ever attempt. Sarah felt her heart rate increase. What kind of distances are you talking about? Elena smiled. The current high school record is 3,800 meters. But with the right training, equipment, and conditions, exceptional shooters have achieved successful hits beyond 4,000 meters. It requires years of dedicated practice, advanced mathematical knowledge, and mental discipline that very few people possess. For 1,000 meters, the number was close enough to Sarah's private goal of 4,200 meters to make her pulse quicken. Elena was talking about the kind of distances that had seemed like impossible dreams just months earlier. Would you be interested in discussing advanced training opportunities? Elena asked. Sarah looked around the range, taking in the sophisticated equipment, the professional atmosphere, and the other students who were still talking excitedly about their day's achievements. 6 months earlier, she would have been terrified by the attention and responsibility that Elena was offering. Now, thinking about her grandfather's patient instruction and the satisfaction she felt when arrow or bullet hit exactly where she intended, Sarah felt ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. "Yes," she said with quiet confidence. "I would very much like to discuss that." Winter arrived early that year, blanketing Lincoln High School in a layer of snow that turned the campus into a crystalline wonderland. For most students, the cold weather meant indoor activities and complaints about icy sidewalks. For Sarah Chun, it meant the beginning of the most intensive training period of her life. Elena Vasquez had been true to her word about advanced training opportunities. 3 times a week, Sarah now traveled to Riverside Range for specialized instruction that went far beyond the school's regular precision sport program. She worked with professional-grade equipment, studied advanced ballistics calculations, and practiced in weather conditions that most recreational shooters avoided entirely. The transformation in Sarah's daily life was remarkable. Where she had once been invisible in school hallways, she now received nods of recognition from students who had heard about her achievements. Teachers who had previously struggled to engage her in class discussions now found her eager to connect physics and mathematics lessons to real-world applications. The Coriolis effect becomes significant at distances beyond 1,000 meters, Sarah explained during a physics class discussion, surprising everyone, including Mrs. Chun. The Earth's rotation causes projectiles to deflect slightly to the right in the northern hemisphere. You have to calculate the deviation and adjust your aim accordingly. Her study group with Jessica, David, and Amanda had evolved into something resembling a support team for a professional athlete. David had become expert at calculating ballistic solutions for various distances and conditions. Amanda focused on physical conditioning exercises that improve stability and breath control. Jessica had appointed herself as Sarah's unofficial public relations manager, ensuring that her achievements receive recognition in the school newspaper and during morning announcements. But it was during her intensive training sessions with Elena that Sarah truly began to understand the magnitude of what she was attempting. Precision shooting at extreme distances wasn't just about equipment and technique. It required a level of mental discipline and physical control that pushed human capabilities to their absolute limits. At 1,000 meters and beyond, Elena explained during a particularly challenging December training session, "You're no longer shooting at targets. You're solving complex physics problems in real time while maintaining perfect physical control under pressure. The margin for error becomes so small that a single heartbeat can throw off your shot." Sarah was working with a specialized rifle system that represented the cutting edge of precision shooting technology. The scope could calculate distance, wind speed, temperature, humidity, and barometric pressure automatically. Computer systems provided ballistic solutions that accounted for dozens of variables simultaneously. But even with all this technology, success ultimately depended on the shooter's ability to execute perfect technique at the moment of firing. Her current personal record stood at 850 meters, a distance that placed her among the top high school precision shooters in the state. But Elena had been gradually increasing the challenges, introducing complications that would prepare Sarah for the truly extreme distances they were building toward. "Today, we're going to try something different," Elena announced as Sarah arrived for her Wednesday afternoon session. "I want to see how you perform under pressure, with limited time, and with an audience." Sarah's heart rate immediately increased. She had grown comfortable with the controlled environment of their training sessions, but real competitive shooting involved variables she hadn't yet experienced. Elena led her to the 1,000-meter range, where several other instructors and advanced students had gathered. Among them was Thomas Reeves, a former military sniper who held several civilian long-distance shooting records. Sarah recognized him from shooting magazines and online forums dedicated to precision marksmanship. "This is the student I've been telling you about," Elena said by way of introduction. "Sarah, Thomas wanted to observe your technique and provide some feedback on your progress toward extreme distance shooting." Thomas shook Sarah's hand with a firm grip and studied her with the same analytical intensity she had come to expect from serious shooters. "Elena says you've achieved 850 meters with remarkable consistency. That's impressive for someone with less than 6 months of rifle experience." He gestured toward the 1,000-meter target, which was barely visible even through spotting scopes. But 1,000 meters represents a significant jump in difficulty. At this distance, every tiny imperfection in technique gets magnified. Variables that don't matter at shorter ranges become critical factors. Sarah nodded, feeling both intimidated and excited by the challenge. She had been working toward this distance for weeks, but always in private sessions with Elena. Having an expert like Thomas observe her attempt added pressure that made her hands slightly unsteady. "The key," Thomas continued, "is to treat it exactly like any other shot. Same preparation, same technique, same mental approach. Don't let the distance change your fundamentals." Sarah settled into position behind the rifle, beginning the careful setup routine that Elena had drilled into her over months of training. She adjusted the bipod, checked the scope settings, and verified that her body position provided maximum stability. Through the scope, the 1,000-meter target appeared as a tiny speck surrounded by vast empty space. The wind conditions were challenging, light, and variable, with gusts coming from different directions along the range. Sarah studied the wind flags positioned at intervals down the range, noting the subtle variations that would affect her bullet's flight path over the extended distance. Elena provided the ballistic calculation: elevation 6.2 minutes of angle up, windage 1.4 minutes right for the average wind condition. But watch for gusts. You may need to adjust. Sarah made the scope adjustments and began her breathing sequence. She had learned to slow her heart rate and enter a state of focused calm that Elena called the zone. In this state, external distractions faded away, and her awareness became entirely focused on the precise moment when all conditions aligned for the perfect shot. She watched the wind flags carefully, waiting for a lull in the variable gusts. When the flags straightened briefly, indicating more consistent wind direction, she began her final aiming sequence. The crosshairs settled on the calculated aim point. Sarah's breathing became controlled and rhythmic. Her finger took up the slack in the trigger, reaching the precise pressure point where the slightest additional movement would fire the rifle. She fired. The bullet's flight time to 1,000 meters was long enough that Sarah could track its path through the scope, watching as it arced high above the intervening terrain before beginning its descent toward the target. The crack of impact echoed back across the range several seconds later. Thomas raised his spotting scope immediately, studying the target with professional intensity. Elena used her own scope to confirm the shot placement. The gathered observers waited in suspense for the verdict. "Hit," Thomas announced. "Inner ring, approximately 2 inches from center. Outstanding shot." Sarah felt a surge of accomplishment that dwarfed anything she had experienced in her previous training. Breaking the 1,000-meter barrier represented entry into an elite level of precision shooting that very few people ever achieved. But Thomas wasn't finished with his evaluation. "That was an excellent shot under pressure," he said, approaching Sarah as she cleared the rifle. "Your technique is solid, your mental discipline is impressive, and your natural ability is undeniable. Elena tells me you're interested in attempting extreme distances." Sarah nodded, not trusting herself to speak coherently. Thomas studied her seriously. Extreme distance shooting, beyond 1,500 meters, requires everything you just demonstrated, plus additional skills that can only be developed through extensive training. It's not just about hitting a target. It's about understanding atmospheric conditions, equipment limitations, and your own physical and mental capabilities at a level that most shooters never reach. He paused, looking out toward the distant mountains visible beyond the range. There are opportunities for exceptional shooters to attempt distances that push the boundaries of what's possible with current technology. Records that have stood for years, waiting for someone with the right combination of skill, knowledge, and determination to break them. Sarah felt her pulse quicken. She knew Thomas was talking about the kind of distances she had been dreaming about since joining the program. What kind of distances? The current civilian record for a precision shot by someone under 20 years old is 4,180 meters, Thomas said quietly. It was achieved 2 years ago by a college student in Colorado under ideal conditions with a specialized rifle system. 4,180 meters. Sarah's private goal of 4,200 meters was suddenly within the realm of realistic possibility rather than impossible fantasy. There's a specialized training facility in the mountains about 2 hours from here, Thomas continued. It's designed specifically for extreme distance shooting, with ranges extending to nearly 5,000 meters. The facility runs intensive programs for advanced shooters who want to push the absolute limits of precision marksmanship. Elena stepped forward with a serious expression. Sarah, what Thomas is describing represents a significant commitment. This kind of training is physically and mentally demanding. It requires perfect weather conditions, specialized equipment, and months of preparation. Most importantly, it requires complete dedication to achieving something that very few people ever attempt. Sarah looked back and forth between Elena and Thomas, realizing that they were offering her an opportunity to pursue the goal that had been driving her improvement since she first read about extreme distance shooting. The 4,200-meter shot that had seemed like an impossible dream was being presented as an achievable objective. What would be required? She asked. Thomas smiled, recognizing the determination in her voice. Intensive training 3 times per week through the spring. Physical conditioning to maintain stability at extended distances. Advanced study of meteorology, ballistics, and equipment optimization. And, most importantly, the mental preparation to attempt a shot that will either succeed spectacularly or fail completely, with no middle ground. Elena added, we would also need approval from your parents and cooperation from the school district. This level of training goes beyond what most high school programs attempt. Sarah thought about her grandfather and the patient way he had taught her to pursue excellence without worrying about what others might think. She thought about the transformation she had experienced over the past months, from invisible student to accomplished precision shooter. Most importantly, she thought about the satisfaction of setting an ambitious goal and working systematically toward achieving it. I want to try, she said with quiet conviction. Thomas and Elena exchanged glances, and Sarah caught a look of excitement passing between them. In that case, Thomas said, we need to start planning immediately. The optimal weather conditions for extreme distance attempts occur in late spring and early summer. That gives us approximately 6 months to prepare you for a 4,200-meter attempt. 4,200 meters. Hearing the number spoken aloud as an actual goal rather than a private dream made Sarah's heart race with anticipation and anxiety. Elena placed a hand on Sarah's shoulder. This will be the most challenging thing you've ever attempted. There will be days when progress seems impossible and moments when you'll question whether you're capable of achieving it. But if anyone can do this, it's someone with your combination of natural talent, analytical intelligence, and determination. As they walked back toward the range building, Sarah felt the weight of the commitment she was making. 6 months of intensive training, leading to an attempt at a distance that had never been achieved by a high school student. Success would place her among the most accomplished precision shooters in the country. Failure will be very public and potentially discouraging. But as she thought about her grandfather's teachings and the journey that had brought her from invisible student to elite shooter, Sarah realized that the outcome was less important than the pursuit itself. Whether she succeeded or failed at 4,200 meters, The process of attempting it would teach her things about herself that no other challenge could provide. That evening, Sarah sat at her desk with a fresh notebook and began planning her approach to the most ambitious goal she had ever set for herself. On the first page, she wrote simply, 4,200 meters, spring 2026. Below that, she began listing the training objectives, study requirements, and preparation steps that would define the next phase of her transformation from quiet observer to elite competitor. The girl who had once hidden in corners was preparing to attempt something that would place her at the center of national attention in the precision shooting community. And, for the first time in her life, that prospect excited rather than terrified her. June arrived with perfect clarity, both meteorologically and metaphorically. After 6 months of the most intensive training of her life, Sarah Chun stood at the firing line of the Mountain Vista Precision Range, preparing for an attempt that would either establish a new record for high school students or serve as an expensive lesson in the limits of human capability. The transformation in Sarah's life had been complete and dramatic. The quiet girl who had once eaten lunch alone now found herself at the center of a small media circus with representatives from shooting magazines, equipment manufacturers, and competitive shooting organizations gathered to witness her attempt at a 4,200-meter precision shot. Her support team had grown to include not just Elena and Thomas, but also Dr. Marcus Webb, a ballistics expert from the State University, and Captain Jennifer Hayes, a military sniper instructor who specialized in extreme distance shooting. Even her original study group, Jessica, David, and Amanda, had traveled to the mountain range to provide moral support for the culminating moment of months of preparation. Weather conditions are optimal, Dr. Webb announced, checking his array of meteorological instruments. Temperature stable at 68 degrees, humidity at 35%, barometric pressure steady at 30.15 inches. Wind is light and consistent at 3 to 5 miles per hour from the southwest. Sarah nodded, feeling surprisingly calm despite the significance of the moment. The intensive training had taught her to compartmentalize pressure and focus entirely on the technical aspects of each shot. Whether she was shooting at 100 meters or 4,200 meters, the fundamental process remained the same. The rifle she would be using represented the absolute pinnacle of precision shooting technology. Custom-built by a specialist manufacturer, it fired match-grade ammunition that had been sorted and tested for consistency down to fractional variations in weight and dimensions. The scope was a marvel of optical engineering, capable of calculations and adjustments that would have been impossible just a decade earlier. Target acquisition confirmed. Captain Hayes reported from her position behind a powerful spotting scope. At 4,200 meters, the target was invisible to the naked eye and appeared as barely more than a speck even through high magnification optics. Thomas approached Sarah as she began her pre-shot routine. "Remember everything we've practiced," he said quietly. "This is just another shot with a longer flight time. Same fundamentals, same mental approach, same confidence in your preparation." Sarah began the systematic preparation routine that had become second nature over months of training. She adjusted her shooting mat for optimal body position, verified that the rifle's bipod was properly seated, and checked that all her equipment was positioned for maximum stability and consistency. The mathematical preparation for a 4,200-meter shot was staggering in its complexity. Dr. Webb's ballistic computer had calculated dozens of variables: bullet drop compensation, wind drift accounting for velocity changes along the flight path, Coriolis effect corrections, and even minute adjustments for the curvature of the Earth. The total elevation adjustment required was more than 40 minutes of angle, an enormous correction that would send the bullet in a high arc reminiscent of artillery rather than traditional rifle shooting. "Ballistic solution verified and locked," Dr. Webb announced. "Elevation 41.7 minutes up, windage 2.3 minutes right. Bullet flight time approximately 6.2 seconds. 6.2 seconds. Sarah had practiced with shots that required multi-second flight times, but the reality of waiting more than 6 seconds between trigger pull and impact was still surreal. In competitive shooting, most shots had flight times measured in fractions of a second. Elena approached with the final equipment check. Rifle 0 confirmed, scope tracking verified, ammunition temperature stabilized. Everything is as perfect as we can make it. The rest is up to you. Sarah settled into position behind the rifle, beginning the breathing and mental preparation sequence that Elena had taught her to use for high-pressure situations. She closed her eyes briefly, centering herself and calling up the state of focused calm that had become her trademark during training. The gathered observers maintained respectful silence as Sarah began her final preparation. Through her scope, the target was a tiny geometric shape floating in a sea of brown mountainside. At 4,200 meters, atmospheric conditions along the bullet's path could vary significantly, creating challenges that no amount of calculation could completely predict. Sarah studied the wind indicators positioned at intervals along the range. The flags showed consistent direction, but subtle variations in intensity that would require interpretation and judgment calls that no computer could make for her. This was the moment when all her training, natural ability, and analytical intelligence would combine to either achieve something remarkable or fall short in a very public way. She made final adjustments to her scope settings, accounting for minor changes in wind conditions since the ballistic solution was calculated. Her breathing became controlled and rhythmic, each cycle bringing her deeper into the focused state that Elena called the zone. Range is clear. Shooter is cleared to fire when ready, Thomas announced. Sarah's world narrowed to encompass only the essential elements. Her breathing, the crosshairs in her scope, the pressure of the trigger beneath her finger, and the distant target that represented the culmination of months of dedicated work. She waited for the perfect moment when all variables aligned. Wind conditions settled into a consistent pattern. Her breathing reached the natural pause between exhale and inhale. Her heart rate slowed to its training condition minimum. The crosshairs settled precisely on her calculated aim point. She fired. The rifle recoiled against her shoulder with familiar authority, but Sarah's attention was entirely focused on tracking the bullet's path through her scope. At extreme distances, the bullet's trajectory was high enough to be visible as it arced through the clear mountain air. For 6.2 seconds, time seemed suspended. Sarah watched through her scope as the bullet reached the peak of its trajectory and began its descent toward the target. Around her, the gathered observers held their breath, understanding that they were witnessing an attempt at something that had never been achieved by a high school student. The crack of impact echoed across the mountain valley, the sound reaching them nearly 2 seconds after the bullet struck the target. Captain Hayes was the first to reach her spotting scope, studying the target with professional intensity. Dr. Webb used his own high-powered optics to confirm the shot placement. Elena and Thomas exchanged glances, waiting for the official verdict. Captain Hayes announced, her voice carrying clearly across the range. Dead center. Perfect bullseye at 4,200 meters. The celebration that erupted around Sarah was immediate and overwhelming. Jessica hooped with unrestrained joy. David pumped his fist in triumph. And Amanda captured the moment with her phone camera. The gathered shooting professionals applauded with the respectful enthusiasm of people who understood exactly how difficult what they had just witnessed truly was. But Sarah remained in position behind the rifle, staring through her scope at the target that now bore evidence of her successful shot. After months of training and preparation, the actual moment of achievement felt almost anticlimactic. She had done exactly what she had prepared to do, executing the techniques and applying the knowledge that had been drilled into her through countless hours of practice. Elena approached and placed a hand on Sarah's shoulder. How does it feel to have just set a new record for high school precision shooting? Sarah looked up from the scope, finally allowing herself to smile. It feels like my grandfather was right, she said quietly. He always told me that if you're willing to do the work and trust your preparation, you can achieve things that seem impossible to other people. Thomas joined them, carrying a tablet displaying preliminary calculations based on the shot data. The official measurement confirms 4,200 meters exactly. That's 20 meters farther than the previous record for any shooter under 20 years old. Sarah, you've just achieved something that most professional marksmen never attempt. As the celebration continued around her, Sarah found herself thinking about the journey that had brought her to this moment. Less than a year earlier, she had been the invisible girl who sat alone at lunch and avoided speaking in class. The transformation from silent observer to record-setting athlete still seemed surreal, but she was beginning to understand that the real achievement wasn't the distance of the shot. The real achievement was discovering that she had capabilities she never knew existed, finding a passion that connected her to her grandfather's memory, and learning that quiet determination could be just as powerful as the more obvious forms of confidence displayed by her peers. Dr. Webb approached with official documentation of the shot. Sarah, this achievement qualifies you for several competitive opportunities, including potential scholarship programs and invitations to national-level competitions. The precision shooting community takes notice when someone demonstrates this level of capability. Sarah accepted the documentation with gratitude, but found herself thinking less about future opportunities than about the present moment. She had set an ambitious goal, worked systematically toward achieving it, and succeeded through preparation and perseverance rather than luck or natural talent alone. Jessica bounded over with characteristic enthusiasm. Sarah, you have to tell me how it feels to be famous. This is going to be in magazines and websites and everything. Sarah laughed, realizing that fame had never been her goal. The satisfaction came from the process itself. The months of disciplined training, the gradual improvement in her skills, and the knowledge that she had pushed herself to achieve something that required the absolute best of her capabilities. It feels like the beginning, Sarah said, surprising herself with the realization. I spent so many years thinking that I wasn't the kind of person who could do remarkable things. Now I know that was wrong. This shot isn't the end of something. It's proof that I can set ambitious goals and achieve them if I'm willing to do the work. Elena smiled knowingly. That's the real lesson of precision shooting. It's not about the distance or the records. It's about discovering that you're capable of more than you thought possible. The targets just give you a way to measure your growth. As the group began packing up equipment and preparing for the journey back to town, Sarah took one final look at the 4,200-meter target. The small hole in its center would fade with time, but the confidence and self-knowledge she had gained through achieving it would influence every challenge she faced for the rest of her life. The quiet girl who had once hidden in shadows had found her voice through the precise discipline of extreme distance shooting. But, more importantly, she had discovered that quiet determination, analytical intelligence, and systematic preparation could be more powerful than the flashier qualities that usually received attention in high school. Sarah Chun had hit a target at 4,200 meters, shocking everyone who thought they knew her capabilities. But she had also hit something far more valuable, the understanding that she could achieve anything she was willing to work toward, regardless of what others expected from the girl who used to eat lunch alone. As they drove down from the mountain range, Sarah's phone buzzed with congratulatory messages from classmates who had followed her progress online. The girl who had once been invisible was now being celebrated throughout her school and the wider precision shooting community. But what satisfied her most was knowing that her grandfather would have been proud. She had taken the patient lessons he had taught her in their backyard practice sessions and used them to achieve something that honored both his memory and her own potential. The 4,200-meter shot was remarkable, but the journey that had made it possible was the real victory. Sarah had proven to herself that quiet students could achieve extraordinary things when they found their passion and committed themselves to pursuing excellence. 15 misses had led to the most important hit of her life. But more than that, they had led to her discovering who she really was beneath the shy exterior that had hidden her capabilities for so many years. The quiet girl had found her voice, and It resonated with the precise authority of someone who had learned to trust in her own remarkable potential.